What happens when a beloved comedy star walks into what should be a routine daytime talk show interview, only to find himself under attack from a host seemingly determined to dismantle him piece by piece? That's exactly what unfolded during Adam Sandler's recent appearance on The View, an encounter that quickly escalated from a standard promotional segment into a tense, almost cinematic confrontation that left both the audience and the studio crew on edge. The exchange sparked a storm of discussion online, social media abuzz with clips of the heated moment, commentators dissecting every nuance, and fans divided between shock and admiration. Sandler had arrived at the studio carrying his trademark easygoing smile, the one that had been honed over decades of red carpets, talk shows, and film premieres. He came prepared to promote his latest dramatic project, a deliberate departure from the broad comedies he was historically known for, and one that had already begun earning critical acclaim for its emotional depth and nuanced performances. In his mind, he expected the familiar rhythm of daytime interviews, a few jokes, a brief discussion of the film, light banter with the hosts, perhaps a couple of audience questions, and then a graceful exit. He had rehearsed, he had prepared answers, he had practiced the perfect inflections to maintain charm under the bright studio lights. Instead, he found himself staring down Joy Behar, whose demeanor that morning carried an unfamiliar sharpness, a predatory edge that suggested she had arrived not merely to ask questions, but to challenge, to confront, and to unsettle. The moment the cameras began rolling, the energy in the room shifted. The air seemed thicker, as if every word spoken could ignite sparks. "So, Adam," she began, her tone crisp and cutting enough to slice through the polite hum of studio chatter, "I have to ask about this sudden pivot to serious acting. Are you finally admitting that your comedy career has run its course?" The question hovered in the air like a blade, precise and pointed. Sandler's trademark smile faltered for a split second, a micro expression invisible to most casual viewers, but glaringly obvious to those watching closely. Yet he regained composure almost immediately, his voice calm, controlled, a practiced reassurance to the tens of millions who knew him only as the comedic everyman. "Well, Joy," he said carefully, each syllable measured, "I wouldn't say it's sudden. I've been doing dramatic work for years, and I love exploring different aspects of storytelling." Behar, however, pressed forward, leaning just enough to assert dominance over the frame, her expression sharp, her eyes bright with challenge. "Let's be honest," she said, the words laced with condescension. "Your last few comedies were absolutely panned by critics. Box office disasters. Are you just trying to salvage what's left of your reputation?" The other hosts shifted uneasily in their seats. Whoopi Goldberg cast a subtle, warning glance at Behar, but it barely slowed her momentum. This was clearly the line she had chosen to push, the moment she had been building toward, and nothing short of an official intervention would halt it. Sandler, meanwhile, remained outwardly composed, but there was tension in the set of his jaw, a subtle tightening that betrayed irritation without breaking his public poise. "I think my fans would disagree with that assessment," he said evenly, leaning back slightly, arms relaxed but shoulders stiff enough to suggest he was bracing for the next verbal volley. "My movies connect with people, and that's what matters to me. Not everyone has to like everything I do. Connect with people." Behar's tone sharpened further. "You mean connect with 12-year old boys who think fart jokes are the height of comedy? When was the last time you made something intelligent, Adam?" The murmurs of the studio audience grew louder, uneasy whispers spreading through the rows, as if the collective atmosphere of the room could register the personal nature of Behar's attack. It wasn't playful ribbing. It wasn't the light teasing common to daytime talk shows. This felt surgical, precise, and cruel, designed to leave a mark. Behar leaned closer, her voice rising slightly. "Your so-called dramatic performances are just your regular shtick with fewer laughs. You're not fooling anyone into thinking you're a serious actor." Sandler's publicist, seated quietly off camera, straightened in concern, ready to intervene, to calm the rising tension. But Sandler gave her a subtle gesture, just the flick of a hand, to signal patience. He wasn't ready to escalate. He wanted this exchange to remain on his terms. He had survived decades in Hollywood by choosing battles carefully, and this, he decided, would be no different. "You know what, Joy," he said finally, voice controlled, calm, but threaded with steel. The contrast between his easygoing persona and the sudden edge in his tone made the room lean in subconsciously, even those who hadn't been watching closely. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've made movies that brought joy to millions of people. I've worked with some of the most talented actors and directors in Hollywood. If you want to sit here and tear me down, that's your choice. But I will not sit here and let you disrespect my career or my fans." Behar laughed, a sound meant to dismiss, but it was slightly off, lacking its usual levity. The audience shifted again, sensing the sharp pivot in the dynamic. The laughter felt like a challenge thrown across a table, and Sandler, unflinching, held his ground. The studio lights seemed to emphasize every micro-expression, the smallest flickers of tension and defiance amplified by the camera's lenses. The rest of the room held its breath. The other hosts, frozen between curiosity and concern, didn't dare intervene. Sandler's composure, his deliberate cadence, and the way he managed the balance between public charm and personal assertiveness had transformed what could have been a humiliating ambush into a quiet triumph of poise. Even in the heightened tension, Sandler's words carried both defense and dignity. He reminded the viewers subtly but unmistakably that his career spanned decades, that his audience was vast, and that his contribution to comedy and culture was measurable not in critics' scores alone, but in the happiness he had delivered to millions. He stood firm, a paradoxical mixture of genial everyman and steely veteran, showing the power of calm under pressure. For the first time, the confrontation shifted subtly. Behar's relentless barrage met the wall of Sandler's experience, the kind of calm that can only come from surviving scrutiny, rejection, and criticism over decades. The audience, watching live, was caught in the middle of a classic duel, not of fists or fury, but of words, reputations, and the clash between generational perspectives on art, value, and legitimacy. The exchange, tense and electric, would be clipped, shared, and replayed across social media for days. Analysts would debate the fairness of Behar's line of questioning, fans would defend Sandler's integrity, and critics would dissect every pause, inflection, and gesture for hidden meaning. But in the studio that day, Sandler had demonstrated something simple yet profound: the ability to assert himself, defend his work, and maintain dignity even under direct personal attack. And so, what should have been a routine promotion for a film about serious themes, family, loss, personal growth, became a defining moment of poise under pressure, a microcosm of Sandler's career, resilient, persistent, and, above all, unapologetically human. "Personal reasons, please," Sandler replied carefully, his tone measured, the words delivered as a boundary rather than a challenge. He leaned slightly back in the chair, the soft lighting of the studio catching the faint lines of exhaustion and decades of experience etched into his face. He had walked into this interview expecting the standard combination of friendly banter and film promotion, but something in Joy Behar's eyes told him immediately that this would not be standard. "This isn't personal, Adam." Behar countered sharply, her voice cutting through the hum of cameras and murmuring audience members. "This is about calling out mediocrity. You've coasted on juvenile humor for decades, making millions while real artists struggle to be seen." Her words were precise, deliberate, and calculated to provoke. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the undercurrent of conflict, the kind of tension that makes ordinary talk shows feel like high-stakes drama. Sandler's eyebrows lifted, the motion almost imperceptible but significant. "Real artists," he said slowly, letting the words roll with careful weight. "So comedy isn't art now. Entertainment isn't valuable. The movies I make employ hundreds of people. They give families something to laugh about together. They help people forget their troubles for a couple of hours. If that isn't valuable, then what is?" He paused, eyes scanning the room, taking in the small reactions of the production crew and the audience, before continuing in the same calm but resolute tone. The other hosts, sensing the rising storm, attempted to intervene, their voices polite yet tentative, trying to steer the conversation back toward film promotion or safer topics. but Behar was relentless. Her posture was forward, her hands gesturing subtly but firmly, her voice sharpened with the conviction of someone who felt she had a moral obligation to speak her truth. "Spare me the noble speech," she shot back. "You're making schlock and you know it. When was the last time you truly challenged yourself as a performer? When was the last time you took a real risk?" For the first time in the interview, Sandler's composure cracked, not violently, but enough that the tension in the room thickened noticeably. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles whitening as he leaned forward, and his voice rose slightly, carrying an intensity that contrasted sharply with his usual amiable, self-deprecating tone. "You want to talk about risks, Joy? Every time I step in front of a camera, every time I perform for an audience, I risk failure. Every time I put myself out there for people to judge, that's a risk. And you know what the biggest risk is." He paused deliberately, letting the question hang like smoke in the studio air. Sitting across from someone who's supposed to be a professional interviewer, only to be ambushed by someone with a personal vendetta. A hush fell over the studio. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed to hold their collective breath. Every microphone, every lens, every soft click of equipment was suddenly amplified by the tension in the room. Behar's usual confident smirk flickered but didn't fully disappear. Instead, it hardened into something colder, sharper. "A vendetta," she said, voice steady but icy. "Or maybe I'm just someone not afraid to tell the truth about Hollywood's golden boy who never grew up." That was the breaking point. Sandler's eyes narrowed, a fiery intensity burning behind them, his posture rigid yet controlled, the calm exterior replaced by the simmering power of decades of experience under public scrutiny. His voice dropped, quiet yet dangerously precise. Every word weighted with the authority of a man who had spent his life facing critics and coming out intact. "You know what, Joy?" he said, each syllable deliberate, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "I've been trying to be respectful, trying to be professional, but you came here with an agenda. So let me ask you, what exactly have you contributed to entertainment? What joy have you brought into people's lives?" The studio felt electrically charged. Even the audience, previously murmuring, fell silent as the exchange escalated into something far beyond normal daytime talk show drama. Behar flushed red, the color rising quickly in her cheeks as the question landed like a physical blow. "Excuse me," she said sharply, voice higher than usual. "I've been a broadcaster for decades. I've won awards, broken stories, held politicians accountable." Sandler, unmoved, leaned slightly forward, his voice steady but unyielding, a calm storm contained within measured speech. "And yet here you are," he continued, eyes locking with hers, "using your platform to tear down someone who has spent decades trying to make people laugh. You want to talk about taking the easy road. How about sitting behind a desk every day, throwing stones at people who actually put themselves out there creatively?" The audience, previously tense but passive, began to stir at the intensity of the verbal exchange. The other hosts looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. The air was heavy with anticipation, every second stretching longer than usual, as though the studio itself had decided to hold its breath. Sandler's voice cut sharply through the static tension, calm yet forceful, a controlled cadence that left no room for interruption. "Every movie I make, every character I portray, every story I try to tell, it's all about connecting with people, giving them moments of joy, even if just for a couple of hours. That's the work I've dedicated my life to. And for you to stand there and belittle that, that's the risk I didn't expect to face today, but it's one I'm willing to take." Joy opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but the momentum had shifted. Sandler had claimed the center of the conversation, framing the exchange on his terms without raising his voice unnecessarily. There was power in his calm, and authority in the weight of decades of lived experience. Even as the tension remained palpable, it was now tempered by a subtle respect for the man across from her, a reminder that his career, his legacy, and his audience weren't defined by the sharpness of a single question or the severity of a critique. One of the co-hosts, sensing the precarious balance, suggested taking a quick break, trying to reset the room, to dissipate some of the heat. But Sandler held his ground, his gaze unwavering, his voice steady. The confrontation was no longer merely about criticism or career evaluation. It had become a demonstration of resilience, the embodiment of a lifetime navigating both the praise and the scorn of the public eye. The studio had transformed into something closer to a battleground of words than a standard talk show set. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully chosen syllable contributed to the tension, the drama, the sense that this was no ordinary interview. Sandler's measured responses, his firm assertion of value, and his ability to defend both his craft and his fans created a spectacle in itself, a quiet, controlled, powerful counterattack to the relentless scrutiny he faced. By the time the segment concluded, the audience had been witness to more than just a promotional interview. They had watched a man navigate aggression, criticism, and personal attack while maintaining dignity and clarity. They had watched a seasoned performer claim his ground, demonstrating not just the value of comedy, but the courage it takes to confront critique head-on, unafraid, unapologetic, and unshaken. Sandler had arrived expecting light conversation, and he left demonstrating something far deeper, the artistry of resilience, the power of defense without rage, and the quiet authority that comes from a life spent mastering both craft and character in the unforgiving glare of public attention. A scam, the word hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and accusatory, and Adam Sandler's reaction was immediate, incredulous. He leaned back slightly, eyes widening just enough to betray his disbelief, though his body remained composed, grounded in the ease of decades of performance. A scam, he repeated, voice calm but incredulous, each syllable deliberate. Lady, I've never promised anyone anything other than entertainment. There was a subtle weight to the words, a careful distinction being made. He hadn't claimed to solve society's problems or change the world. He'd merely offered laughter, a brief reprieve from the challenges of daily life. Sandler's gaze swept the studio, briefly catching the reactions of the audience, the crew, and the other hosts. People pay to see my movies because they want to laugh, he continued, his tone growing steadier, imbued with quiet authority. They want to escape, they want to feel good for 2 hours, and you know what? They get exactly what they pay for. His voice carried a mixture of pride and measured defiance, the kind that comes from years of experience navigating both praise and criticism in an industry that often seeks to diminish rather than elevate. The studio seemed to hold its collective breath, caught in the tension of the exchange. Every camera lens, every microphone, every soft click of equipment felt magnified, recording not just dialogue but energy, attitude, and raw emotion. The production crew, usually behind the cameras, moved cautiously, aware that the unfolding scene was teetering on the edge of something historic. Sandler, usually the comedic everyman capable of absorbing critique with a smile, was now firmly asserting his position, his tone rising just enough to assert authority without tipping into anger. And you know what? He added, leaning slightly forward, hands gripping the edges of the chair as if to anchor himself. They get exactly what they pay for. Can you say the same about this show? Can you say people tune in expecting to watch someone get ambushed, humiliated, and ridiculed under the guise of so-called journalism? Joy Behar, whose morning had already been charged with intensity, reacted instantly. She shot up from her chair, matching Sandler's energy with equal force. Her posture became rigid, her expression tight with indignation. The audience could sense the escalation, the shift from a tense interview to a verbal battlefield. People tune in expecting honesty. She shot back, voice sharp, elevated, resonating through the studio. They expect someone to ask the tough questions instead of just lobbing softballs at celebrities who think they're untouchable. Sandler's reaction was immediate, though he maintained a measured composure, his lips curling into a laugh that was devoid of humor, more of a disbelief-laden scoff, the kind of laugh that signals someone is incredulous at what they are hearing, yet still chooses to remain controlled. "Tough questions," he said, his tone carefully even but pointed. "You think this is journalism?" His gaze swept across the table, lingering briefly on Behar, then moving to the co-hosts who were now visibly tense. "You think what you're doing right now is serving the public?" There was a pause, a deliberate, weighted silence, thick enough that the hum of studio lights and the soft movement of cameras became audible. Sandler's voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the pause like a precise instrument. This isn't journalism, Joy. This isn't investigation. This isn't holding power to account, and it isn't education. This, he emphasized, sweeping his hand toward the host, the cameras, the stage itself. This is a hit job, and everyone watching right now can see it for what it is. The tension in the studio spiked further. The camera operators, trained to follow conversation and capture every nuance, seemed momentarily paralyzed. Should they cut to close-ups, focus on the audience, capture both hosts? Each operator hesitated, unsure whether to intervene in framing or let the drama unfold organically, knowing that any adjustment could dilute the raw tension building on set. The other hosts, caught between their roles as mediators and participants, sat frozen in their chairs. Whoopi Goldberg, usually quick with a diplomatic interjection, paused mid-breath, unsure whether to attempt reconciliation or remain a witness to the unprecedented unfolding moment. The line between routine daytime television and high-stakes confrontation had blurred entirely. Every heartbeat, every shallow intake of breath in the room felt amplified. Behar, undeterred, squared her shoulders and met Sandler's stare, her eyes flashing with determination. "You think I'm just here to ambush you? You think I'm being unfair?" she asked, voice tight but carrying her trademark sharpness. The audience leaned forward, collectively sensing the personal intensity of the exchange. There was no humor here, no lightness, only a clash of perspectives, ideologies, and interpretations of value, art, and public responsibility. Sandler's lips pressed together, a subtle expression of tension crossing his face, though his gaze remained unwavering. "Let me be clear," he said slowly, each word chosen with precision. "The work I do is entertainment, yes, but it has value. It brings people together. It gives them joy. And when someone like you comes in under the guise of integrity and calls that work meaningless, it's not just unfair, it's an attack on the millions of people who enjoy it, and on everyone who works hard to make it happen behind the scenes." The audience murmured quietly, tension building like a low hum. It was one of those rare moments in live television where the audience could feel history being made, or at least witness something extraordinary. A celebrity standing his ground not with rage or theatrics, but with quiet, unwavering conviction. Sandler's tone had shifted from defensive to declarative, his body language signaling controlled power. A man who had been publicly scrutinized, belittled, and attacked countless times, and yet refused to let anyone diminish the value of his work. Behar leaned forward again, her chair scraping slightly against the studio floor, a minor but startling sound in the suddenly silent room. "You think this is a noble defense," she said sharply, matching his intensity. "You think entertainment alone is enough to excuse decades of mediocrity, of laughing at the lowest common denominator?" Sandler shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, and allowed himself a small, calm smile, not a concession, but a quiet assertion of perspective. "No," he said softly, though the weight in his tone contradicted the softness of his voice. "I don't think entertainment is a scapegoat. I think it's a service, and if that service makes someone's day better, even for a couple of hours, if it makes a family laugh together, or helps someone forget their troubles, that's more meaningful than 1,000 lectures from a desk." The other hosts exchanged glances, some nervously shifting in their seats, some nodding subtly at the subtle power balance shifting before them. The crew behind the cameras adjusted carefully, capturing the subtle but unmistakable tension, the shifting dominance of the exchange. The audience remained still, rapt, sensing the rare electricity of a live confrontation where the stakes weren't ratings alone, but integrity, reputation, and the fundamental question of what constitutes value in art, entertainment, and public discourse. Behar's expression hardened, but there was the faintest trace of hesitation, a recognition that the terrain had shifted, that the intended ambush had met resistance more formidable than she had anticipated. Sandler's voice, controlled yet infused with authority, had reclaimed the space, reframed the conversation, and challenged not only her critique, but the very assumption that attacking entertainment for profit equated to moral superiority. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every inflection, every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, and as the segment continued, the dynamic had irrevocably changed. This was no longer a routine daytime television interview. It was a staged confrontation turned masterclass in composure, in measured defense, and in standing firmly for one's craft under scrutiny, all unfolding live before millions of eyes. By the end of the exchange, the audience and crew alike were left with a clear message. Adam Sandler had faced criticism, personal attacks, and a professional ambush, and he had met it not with anger alone, but with reasoned authority, calm resilience, and a subtle but unmistakable reclamation of the narrative. In that rare and intense intersection of entertainment, critique, and personal integrity, the man known for laughs had demonstrated something far deeper: the courage to stand unflinching, articulate the value of his work, and assert dignity even when the room itself seemed to challenge it.